Her voice echoed through the restaurant, loud, smug, unmistakably performative. "You're under citizen's arrest for impersonating federal personnel," she shouted. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just quietly unclipped my badge and placed it face up on the table. 3 minutes later, her captain stormed in and stopped cold when he saw it. His eyes widened, his back straightened. And then, in front of my entire family and half the town, he said 6 words that turned my sister's smirk into ash. "Chief Officer Alvarez, my deepest apologies." She called me a fraud, but tonight everyone was about to learn exactly who I was, and who I've always been. The steakhouse was too fancy for the people sitting inside it. White tablecloths, polished wood, wine glasses that nobody at our table knew how to hold properly. It was my mother's 65th birthday, and Brooke, my younger sister, the town's pride and joy, had planned the whole thing. Reserved the table, picked the menu, told everyone what time to show up and what to wear. She arrived in full uniform, not because she was on duty, but because she wanted to be seen. Police sergeant stripes perfectly pressed, badge gleaming, a pistol holstered at her hip like it was part of her identity. She hugged Mom with exaggerated warmth and gave Dad that high-five slap-on-the-back combo he always loved. She even nodded at me, the way people nod at a receptionist they've seen a few times. I showed up in a navy blouse and black slacks. No badge, no fanfare, just the quiet sister with the government job. That's who I'd been assigned to be in this family a long time ago. Dinner started off predictably. Brooke dominated the table, telling stories like she was auditioning for a reality show. Tales of tense traffic stops, unruly suspects, her brave split-second decisions. My parents hung on to every word like she was the star of a cop drama they watched religiously. Every "ma'am, step out of the vehicle" was met with admiration and awe. I sipped my water and kept my mouth shut. I'd learned a long time ago that my silence kept things smooth. Until it didn't. Halfway through the second course, ribeye for Mom, salmon for me, Brooke turned toward me with that familiar glint in her eyes, the one that said, "I'm bored, let's stir the pot." "So, Lucia," she said, voice dripping with performative pity, "still shuffling papers in that little government cubicle of yours? Or did they promote you to alphabetizing color-coded folders now?" Laughter from my parents, not loud, but real. My father shook his head like it was just harmless teasing. My mother smiled without looking up from her plate. I felt the ledger in my mind flip open again, the one I'd been quietly updating since childhood. One more tally mark. I smiled, calm even. "It's a bit more complicated than that," I replied, voice soft but steady. Brooke scoffed, loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. "Oh, I'm sure it is." Then with theatrical flair, she leaned forward, eyes landing on the credential partially visible under my jacket. "What's that?" she said, grinning wide. "Don't tell me that's one of those fake Homeland badges you buy at convention booths. Lucia, impersonating federal agents is an actual felony, you know." The table went silent, the clink of silverware, the hum of the AC. My father cleared his throat. My mother looked like she wanted to slide under the table. Brooke, emboldened by the silence, stood up and planted both hands on her hips. "You know what? I'm calling Captain Monroe. Let's clear this up right now." She was smiling like she'd already won. Her fingers danced across her phone screen. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just reached down, unhooked the small rectangular badge from my belt, and gently placed it on the white tablecloth beside my glass. It didn't shine. It didn't scream for attention. Just a dark navy polymer card with an eagle in silver and, if you looked very, very closely, a 7-pointed holographic star in the lower corner. To Brooke, it was a prop. To me, it was protocol. To the man she was calling, it was about to be a bomb. And I knew the countdown had just begun. The truth is, I didn't disappear at that birthday dinner. I vanished 10 years earlier. It happened on a June afternoon so hot the backyard grill gave up before the guests did. My parents were hosting a party for Brooke's graduation from the police academy. There were banners, balloons, a sheet cake with her name in buttercream. Relatives I hadn't seen in years showed up with gift bags and loud praise, all of it orbiting around the same bright sun, my younger sister. She looked sharp, I'll give her that. Blue uniform crisp, badge new, boots polished. She basked in the attention, soaking it up like sunlight. My dad made a toast. Of course he did. He tapped his beer bottle on the edge of the picnic table like it was a microphone. "To our very own hero," he said, eyes beaming with pride. Brooke chose a real job, one that matters, one where she wears the badge and makes a difference. The cheers were loud, laughter followed, champagne popped, someone yelled, "Protect and serve, baby," and everyone laughed again. No one noticed when I slipped inside the house, walked quietly to the mailbox, and pulled out the envelope I'd been waiting 6 weeks to receive. Plain white, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Official acceptance, Strategic Intelligence Direct Commissioning Program. A program so classified most Americans didn't even know it existed. A career path that required 3 years of vetting, language testing, and background checks so deep they interviewed my college roommate's ex. I stood there holding the letter, hearing the roar of applause from the backyard, and felt nothing. Not joy, not sadness, just a strange, quiet confirmation. I already knew I didn't belong in their version of success. Later, I found my mom in the kitchen, arranging fruit slices on a tray like world peace depended on it. I showed her the letter, hands slightly trembling. This was the biggest thing that had ever happened to me. She glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds, smiled softly, and said, "That's wonderful, honey." Then she patted my hand and added, "But let's focus on Brooke today. Her job is, so much more straightforward." That moment split my life in two. There was the me they could accept, Lucia, the helpful daughter, the quiet one who smiled at the right times and asked if anyone needed more napkins. And then there was the other me, the one they didn't see, the one they refused to see, the one who'd go on to brief top-tier defense officials in underground rooms with no names. At every family event after that, the script repeated itself. My uncles would ask Brooke about drug busts and high-speed chases. Then they'd turn to me, beer in hand, and say, "Still doing that paper-pushing thing for the government?" I'd smile, nod, laugh when expected. Because it was easier than explaining the classified nature of my life. Easier than admitting the people who raised me had no interest in knowing who I really was. They didn't ask, I stopped offering. Over time, I became an expert at fading into the wallpaper. I learned that silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. And while Brooke was collecting praise for writing parking tickets and directing parade traffic, I was overseeing surveillance networks that stretched across oceans. My name was never in the paper, my work never got a toast. But I didn't need their applause. I just needed them to stop pretending I was small. That day at the steakhouse, Brooke thought she could embarrass me into silence again. She didn't realize I hadn't been embarrassed in years. I'd just been patient. She thought I was still the vanishing sister. She was wrong. Because now I wasn't disappearing. I was arriving. There are no windows in the Western Counterintelligence Hub. That's not metaphor. That's architectural fact. The walls are 12 inches thick, made of concrete, steel, and silence. You don't know what time it is unless you check your watch. You don't hear birds. You don't hear traffic. You hear breathing, yours and the people you trust, with the kind of secrets that, if leaked, could bring a city to its knees. Most people would find it claustrophobic. I find it comforting. Down there, I'm not Lucia, the quiet one with the desk job. I'm Chief Officer Alvarez, lead operations strategist for domestic threat analysis and multi-agency signal coordination. The people who report to me carry clearances that most civilians can't even pronounce. When we sit around a screen, the conversations we have aren't about local politics or street patrols. They're about data breaches with foreign fingerprints and flags that don't fly in public. They're about chatter on dark networks, heat maps lighting up places that were supposed to be cold. Upstairs, people debate who said what on TV. Down here, we decide whether an intercepted phrase means a high school prank or a pending chemical incident. One time, a senior intelligence asset embedded in a US-based sleeper cell went dark. No check-in, no signals, silence. The entire protocol tree dropped into red. I didn't panic, I assessed. "Activate Chimera," I told my second-in-command. That order meant burning thousands of hours of surveillance setups, rerouting every file node, and pulling 6 months of planning out from under the enemy's feet before they realized we were onto them. The room moved fast, no questions, just trust. You want to know what I was doing while my dad was asking if I get any fresh air in that office job? I was coordinating real-time signal obfuscation across 4 major metro zones and organizing the extraction of an endangered informant using burner networks, facial masking, and 7-layer encryption in under 9 hours. All he saw was a daughter who didn't post much on Facebook. All Brooke saw was someone who never carried a gun. They didn't see the real weight on my shoulders. They didn't see the choices I made, the ones that didn't end in applause, but in classified memos signed by directors they'd never meet. They didn't want to see. That's the thing about people like my family. If it's not visible, it's not valuable. They need medals, speeches, TV interviews. But my world doesn't give out trophies. It gives you silence. If you do your job right, no one ever knows you were there. And I was good at it, too good. That's why I stopped trying to explain. Every time I sat at a family table, listened to Brooke talk about breaking up bar fights or controlling traffic after football games, I smiled. Not because I respected her work less, but because I knew trying to explain mine would be like describing color to someone who'd never seen light. So I let them believe I was quiet because I had nothing to say. But the truth was, I was carrying things I could never say aloud. Back in that steakhouse, while Brooke smirked over her phone, waiting for her captain to expose me, I wasn't nervous. I was calm. Because I knew something she didn't. I didn't need to defend myself. The world I lived in, the one with no windows, no applause, and no room for ego, was about to speak for me. And it only needed one person to recognize it, someone trained to see what others couldn't. That person was walking through the restaurant doors, and my silence was about to end. He walked into the steakhouse like a man who'd been called in for nonsense. Captain Monroe had the tired look of someone who'd been doing this too long to be impressed. His shoulders hunched slightly, like the weight of other people's drama had finally taken a toll. His uniform was impeccable, his badge clean, his stride direct. He scanned the restaurant with the half-bored, half-annoyed gaze of someone expecting to diffuse a family squabble. Brooke straightened in her chair like she was preparing for a performance. "Captain, over here!" she called, waving with a grin that stretched too wide. He caught her signal, blinked once, and, if I wasn't imagining it, rolled his eyes before changing course toward our table. The air shifted. My parents looked relieved, like this was finally going to settle the situation and return things to normal. My mother even reached for her water glass with a practiced smile, ready to smooth things over once the misunderstanding was cleared. And Brooke? Brooke was practically glowing. "Thanks for coming," she said as he approached, already sliding into her act. "I caught my sister impersonating a federal officer. She's got some kind of fake ID clipped to her belt, total security risk. I figured you'd want to verify it in person." She gestured dramatically to the ID card still resting on the table next to my glass. Captain Monroe didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge my parents or the crowd that had quietly gone silent around us. His eyes landed on me. Then they dropped slowly, deliberately to the card on the table. He froze. Not like he was confused, not like he was surprised, like he'd just walked into classified territory without clearance. The casual irritation on his face evaporated. His shoulders snapped back. His spine straightened so fast it was like someone yanked him upright with invisible thread. And then, with the kind of respect that can't be faked, he came to a dead stop and stood at attention. "Chief Officer Alvarez, ma'am," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. "I sincerely apologize for this disturbance. Do you require any support?" You could have heard a pin drop. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father blinked, then blinked again, like his brain was buffering, trying to translate what had just happened. "Brooke?" She stopped breathing. Her face, moments ago smug with victory, crumpled like a dropped paper cup. Wait, what?" she stammered, looking between us. "What are you talking about? She works in an office. She files things. She's not a... What's going on?" Captain Monroe didn't take his eyes off me. He didn't even acknowledge her confusion. I kept my voice level, calm, exactly the way I'd learned to speak in briefing rooms beneath the Pentagon. "Situation is under control, Captain," I said, "but I recommend Sergeant Alvarez receive an immediate refresher on Title 18 of the U.S. Code, specifically sections pertaining to obstruction of federal personnel and cross-agency deconfliction protocol." He nodded once, sharply. "Yes, ma'am." Then he turned to Brooke, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. His voice was no longer professional, it was ice. "Sergeant, my car, now." She looked around for help, first to my mother, then my father, but no one moved. She opened her mouth to protest, something about just being concerned, but he cut her off with one word. "Move." And just like that, she was gone. Dragged out of the restaurant, her badge still gleaming, her pride crumpled in her clenched fists. And in the silence she left behind, I finally understood something. My sister had spent her whole life trying to prove I didn't belong at the table. Turns out, it was her who never stood a chance. The door to the restaurant swung shut with a soft thud. The kind of sound that doesn't usually mean anything, unless you've just watched your sister get escorted out by her commanding officer. No one at the table said a word. Not my mother, who was still clutching her napkin like it might somehow anchor her to this crumbling reality. Not my father, whose jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. And definitely not me. For once, silence wasn't something forced on me. It was mine. I reached for my glass of water, took a slow sip, and then gently laid my napkin beside the empty plate. My movements were calm, deliberate. The hum of conversation from the rest of the restaurant started to return, but our table stayed wrapped in something heavier than quiet. It was the sound of a script being torn in half. My mother looked at me like she was seeing a stranger in her daughter's chair. "Lucia," she said, her voice a whisper that cracked in the middle. "Why didn't you ever say something?" I tilted my head gently, meeting her gaze, not with anger, but with clarity. "I did," I said, "many times. You just heard what you needed to hear." My father finally looked up. There was no pride in his eyes, no anger even, just confusion. like someone had swapped out the ending of a story he'd memorized by heart. "You work in intelligence?" he asked slowly, as if the words themselves tasted foreign. I nodded once. "I lead operations coordination at Western Counterintelligence Command," I said. "I've been in federal service for over a decade. That badge you saw? Clearance Zeta. You won't find it on Google." He swallowed hard. "But all those years, the holidays, the barbecues, you never said—" "I did," I interrupted softly. "You just didn't listen. Because my world didn't look like Brooke's. No gun, no news coverage, no easy applause." My mother's hands were trembling. "We didn't know. We just thought you were quiet." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "I wasn't quiet," I said. "I was translating, constantly. Every achievement, every position, every operation. I tried to shrink it down to something you'd understand. But no matter how I translated it, it was never enough, because it wasn't simple." I looked at both of them, really looked. "You wanted neat, you wanted easy, you wanted a daughter you could explain in 3 words at a family cookout. So you picked Brooke, because she fit." The words weren't angry, they were facts, laid gently on the table like truth wrapped in linen. They didn't argue, because there was nothing left to say. I stood, pushed my chair back slowly, and reached for my wallet. The waiter had been hovering nearby, unsure whether to approach. I gave him a small nod. "Check, please." When it came, I paid in cash and left a generous tip. Then I slid my wallet back into my purse, straightened my blazer, and took one last look at the people who had spent a lifetime looking through me. "I have an early briefing tomorrow," I said. And then I walked out. No grand exit, no final zinger, just the quiet grace of a woman who no longer needed permission to exist fully. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected, crisp, open. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. 3 months later, my life looked the same from the outside. Same address, same job title, same quiet mornings spent walking through secured checkpoints into a building with no name on the door. But inside, everything had changed. Not because they saw me differently, my family hadn't reached out since that dinner, but because I no longer needed them to. That weight I had carried for decades, the constant second-guessing of whether I was enough, it was gone. I didn't even realize how much space it had taken up inside me until I felt what it was like to live without it. My office had no windows, but it had a view, a digital one. A dozen monitors displayed live surveillance feeds, thermal scans, encrypted comms from sources across the country. The work was never ending, and it was rarely recognized. But in this room, no one questioned my value. They didn't need to. Because here, value wasn't measured in Facebook likes or family bragging rights. It was measured in precision, in lives saved, in threats neutralized before anyone knew they existed. One afternoon, I was reviewing a post-op report for a successful counterintelligence sting. A young major knocked softly on my doorframe. He was new, eager, still unshaken by the weight of the job. "Chief Alvarez," he said, his voice steady but respectful. "The secretary asked me to deliver this personally." He handed me a sealed document. Inside was a commendation, official recognition for the success of Operation Oracle. At the bottom, in the secretary's own handwriting, was one sentence: "Your strategic forecast was," and I quote, "disturbingly accurate." I smiled. Not the kind of smile you show people, but the quiet kind. The kind that's just for you. I set the paper aside and turned back to my screen. That's when my personal phone buzzed. I keep it silenced most days. There's rarely anything worth hearing from the outside. But I checked the screen out of habit. It was Brooke. A wall of text. At first I thought it was an apology, but it wasn't, not really. It was a stream of excuses. "I didn't know. I was just trying to protect you. I didn't mean to embarrass you. You should have told us who you were. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I read the whole thing, and then I read it again. It wasn't remorse. It was regret. Regret that she'd been wrong. Regret that she'd been humiliated. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences. That's not the same thing. I didn't reply out of anger. I wasn't angry anymore. I typed 2 words. Message received. Then I blocked her number. I turned my phone face down, exhaled slowly, and returned to my report. Because my peace doesn't live in her understanding. It never did. It lives here, in the quiet rhythm of a job done well, among people who value precision over performance, respect over noise. Brooke thought authority was a badge you wore on your chest. But I've learned something she never will. Real authority is a weight you carry on your shoulders. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't need to prove itself to anyone who isn't qualified to recognize it. And it never needs to explain itself to the people who decided long ago they weren't listening. So I move forward now, not as Lucia, the forgotten sister in the corner chair, but as Chief Officer Alvarez, Clearance Zeta, fully seen, fully silent, fully sovereign. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones most determined to keep us small, because your truth threatens the story they've written about themselves. But here's the thing, you don't need their permission to be powerful, you don't need applause to be valuable, and you don't need to make yourself smaller just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. If you've ever felt unseen in a room full of people who were supposed to know you best, let this be your reminder. Your worth doesn't live in their understanding, it lives in your own quiet knowing. At Sweet Revenge, Happy Ending, we tell stories like these not just to remember the pain, but to celebrate the strength it takes to rise above it, gracefully, powerfully, and on your own terms. If this story made you feel something, share your own story in the comments, or just leave a key if you've ever had to unlock your own power in silence. Because here, your true rank is always recognized, and your ending, it can still be a happy one.